Constantly, we have seen on Conservative Home calls for both and against joining with Reform UK. And today we are going to go over a Conservative that has left the Conservative Party to join Reform, who is in favour of this said pact. And once again, I must actually praise Giles Dilnot, who a couple of weeks ago we covered something like this, where he sat down at a table with a couple of these conservative reform people and basically really pointed out that any pact would just not work. It is not feasible because both sides want each other for very different things. And if they think they are going to achieve some victory, it is incredibly doubtful. However, we are also here looking at, once again, a Conservative completely misunderstanding why his party is in such a state that it is, because he is blaming the state of his party on the Liberal Democrats. And I'm like, what? The Liberal Democrats aren't the problem with your party. They are certainly benefiting from the problems that your current party, well, so you say, the Conservative Party is having at the moment. They absolutely are. But to say that, as we'll see this guy in a moment, that his party is having a Liberal Democrat problem goes back to the argument that is most in vogue at the moment, that, the reason we lost the last election because we weren't conservative enough. And, the British public are just deep yearning for conservative rule. Yeah, they still have not learned any lessons from the last general election. Still not learned any lessons from the last general election. But yeah, let's see what he's got for us today. Oh boy. Anyway, before we do go getting on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, of course, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. So this comes from Danny Barker, and Danny Barker is a former Conservative Party member, activist, candidate, and association chairman, but has moved on to Reform. Gee, I wonder why. But he is now calling for this Reform Conservative pact. He's in favour of this, but however, he says his party now has to solve the Liberal Democrat problem. Ooh, Liberal Democrat problem. Yeah, it's not a Liberal Democrat problem. It's the fact that your party is so internally split on just so many issues that you've lost a lot of those people who are on the more, the right centrist side. People who are, a lot more socially liberal on your side, a lot more people who are pro-Europe on your side, people who look at what's going on at the current Conservative Party and are aghast to see that the government that they're even considering leaving the European Court of Human Rights, because it would be a complete contradiction of everything the Conservative Party has stood for years. Like I said this at the beginning, they have learned nothing. A lot of these people have learned nothing from the last general election whatsoever. Anyway, let's begin, see what he's got to say about this. So there are now a growing number of senior figures in the Conservative Party publicly calling for some form of either pact or alliance with Reform UK before the next election, with the aim now of uniting the right. And that is at least one part they get right. A lot of these figures who are calling for to unite the right are very right. They do correctly identify that if the right-wing vote is split, it damages their chances. that if you have two right-wing parties competing for that exact same right-wing vote, it destroys a lot of their electoral chances. So they are identifying that right, but then they aren't also seeing the other things as that are going on as well. They do get that right, at least. I will give them that. So, anyway, he continues. There has been, of course, amongst others, former Conservative MPs, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Miriam Cates, who have both suggested an agreement not to stand competing candidates in around 100 constituencies where Reform UK has a better chance of taking a seat off Labour. Even if you do that, and you do, you engage in strategic voting, or you decide not to stand candidates, what happens then? What happens in that next parliament after you've given up those seats? What happens in the election after that? Do you then compete in those seats again? Do you continue this pact? Like I say, the party, and especially as we covered just last time, Reform only ever really talks about immigration. There's a whole range of issues and policy Reform UK just does not discuss, that they do not really say too much things about. And that is because they know if they are going to get more democratic, if they are going to give more power to, let's say, the party members, what policies and stuff are they going to insist on? That is going to get really, really messy. And for the moment, like I say, the Reform UK is still Nigel Farage's show. And you've got Rupert Lowe, who's just come out very recently and said, this isn't on. This isn't how you should be running a party. Now, don't like Rupert Lowe, but yeah, he's right. It's not how you should be running a party where essentially Nigel Farage and Richard Trice get to decide everything that's going on. Will this supposed reforming of Reform UK actually go ahead? And if it does go ahead, what is it actually going to look like? Because I don't think it's, shall we say, going to give away power from Farage and Tice. That's for sure. Anyway, backbench MP Esher McVeigh has now also called for a pact at the next election. Very recently, the more senior Conservative MPs and Father of the House, Sir Edward Leigh, told GB News, Chris Hope, that the likelihood of a merger is at least 70% before the next election. That was then swiftly rebutted by Reform UK chairman Zia Youssef as being 0%. Notice that all these calls are coming exclusively from the Conservatives. And yeah, guess what? Reform are interested. Reform isn't even interested because it all comes down to what these talks and negotiations are going to be. Like, what are you going to ask for? What policies are you going to, the devil, as they say, is in the detail. And you can talk, you can espouse all these pacts you want. And every single time we've done a video, you constantly see both these groups want different things that neither side would really too much agree on. So, in response, the leadership of Reform has been constant and unequivocally, there will be no deals. Speaking as someone who is active in Reform UK and a former mayoral and parliamentary candidate, an activist and branch chairman, I am on several local and regional national groups. And I can confirm that it is not just the leadership that is not seeking a merger with the Conservative Party. Yeah. And that is another fair point that has been brought up again. If there was this merger, would the members actually back that? Even if you do engage in this tactical voting, let's say you take a Conservative candidate away or you take the Reform candidate away, are the Conservatives then going to back that Reform candidate, or are the Reform people going to back that Conservative candidate? I don't think so. Because that has been shown time and time again that there is no love lost between these two groups. So the mood music, put my teeth back in, amongst the grassroots is also a firm no thanks. In fact, No one is talking about or even speculating on the merits or otherwise of any sort of tie-up with the Conservatives. So, sorry to burst the bubble. I think it is safe to conclude that this side of a general election, it is not going to happen. But I do have a question for all those Conservatives who are calling for a pact with Reform UK. If you are serious about, quote, uniting the right, then what may I ask, are you going to do about your Liberal Democrat problem? Oh, this is where it's going to get fun, because I can already guarantee you he does not understand the, quote, Liberal Democrat problem. He doesn't understand the problem with his party. And I say instantly, he says, when I say Liberal Democrats, I mean, what I mean is the faction that call themselves the One Nation Tories, Thatcher's wet liberals, who are aligned politically with the Liberal Democrats, somewhere left of centre, and even possibly left of the current Starmer cabinet. Doesn't even understand the party he was once a part of. And bear in mind, these, quote, wet liberals, the wets, as you call them, are quite a substantial part of the Conservative Party. Do you just want to get rid of them? Because this comes down to, once again, the big fundamental question. If you want to make the Tory party a party of the right, that means there is a ton of votes you are sacrificing to the Lib Dems. And by all means, continue to do that. But if you are a bigger tent party and you extend that so that you have more of a bit of the centrist votes, you gain that. You gain those votes. But that means you can't be completely, hard right on all those policies you want. That's party politics, but I can't believe this guy thinks chucking out all those One Nation Tories would somehow be a boon and benefit to the Conservative Party. It absolutely would not be. Anyway, let's get back to this. They are, of course, arguably the single faction within the Conservatives most responsible for the party's historic defeat and ineptitude. Which faction has been in power that caused your single biggest historical defeat and ineptitude? It wasn't the Wets. It wasn't the Wets that caused it. It was those who were on the hard right. The Wets were the constantly ones who were warning about what was going on, what was going to happen. Why are we going in this ever hard right stance? You're losing me voters constantly, guys. What are you doing? If you do that, that is a completely misreading once again, because Boris Johnson was not a one nationer. He was definitely someone who was of the right. Look at all the people who were in and the policies that have been pursued, for since 2019, since 2016. It has not been a one nation Tory policy. It has been one of the hard right of your pie. It has been his own side that cannot understand why they are losing. Hence this whole idea that he is now promoting that, the only reason we lost was because we weren't conservative enough. That is the argument he is making. That is the argument he is putting forth. So, back to this then. They are, of course, the dominant faction in the party and have now chosen or even heavily influenced the selection of many of the recent leaders and prime ministers. Really? Because actively they went against choosing their candidate many, many times. they went and chose, really, David Cameron was the last time they really had any big influence. Theresa May was the unity candidate meant to bring these both sides together. Boris Johnson, very, very much, shall we say, the right backed him incredibly, incredibly so. The One Nationers backed Rishi Sunak. The right, however, of his party went and chose Liz Truss. We saw what happened there. And then after that, Suella Braverman rallied to Rishi Sunak saying, I will bring all those right-wing MPs to your side so that then you can block Boris Johnson, provided you give us certain seats and things that we want from that. Once again, it was the right wing of the party that has been very, very much in control. None of these big policies that were pursued, that have lost them a lot of the stuff, were, shall we say, one nation Tory policies. Some of them were, to some extent. Let's not deny that. There is, of course, some crossover. But let's not forget, it was the hard right of their party that put them in this situation. Now, anyone who tries to label it the Wets' fault is misreading the past couple of years of their own party. So they proudly, of course, describe themselves, he continues, as radically liberal, whatever that means. It doesn't even sound conservative in the slightest. Perhaps it is the very same radical liberalism that is to blame for net zero, mass immigration on steroids, the bloated state, historically high taxes, the wokery and war on freedom of speech that has prospered and flourished under the past 14 years of successive conservative governments. Net zero, first of all, is incredibly popular. The idea that you would dismiss that is foolish. It's a complete misreading of, statistics of what the British public want. Mass immigration on steroids. Well, that was the Boris wave. That happened under one of the most right-wing governments we have ever had, because they knew Britain needed immigrants. Hence, rather than have to rely on EU immigrants, they have to bring in immigrants from another country. Again, doesn't even know that. The bloated state, well, it's not that the state was bloated, it's the fact that, honestly, it has become, I think, very, very much inefficient, mostly because of the fact that they have been told to continuously cut their budgets to do more with less. I think that is the state it's gotten. It is not that the state is bloated. It is the fact that the state does work. It's just that it needs to be funded properly, which also means high taxes, which, you need to do. You cannot ignore the fact that we have high taxes, but we now need to start putting, taxes on the rich on that. And of course, wokery and war on freedom of speech. That is culture war stuff that never really flew with the rest of your Conservative Party. So with Reform starting to take the top of poll after poll, ahead now of the Tories and Labour, and within reach just of a few percentage points of achieving enough votes, if there were an election tomorrow, to gain an outright majority of seats taken by Nigel Farage and others of forming the next government, it is not wishful thinking, but becoming a more realistic prospect. If that is the case, why then are you not winning by-elections? Because in the run-up to the last election, that's what we saw. We saw Lib Dems pull off absolutely historic wins in, conservative-controlled areas. We saw Labour victories in these by-elections. But since the last general election, if Farage is so popular, if Reform is so popular, why then are they not winning by-elections? They should be winning them hand over fist if they're this popular. But they're not. Time and time again, they are not winning. They aren't even in double digits. And we've had over 200 plus by-elections at this point. Reform is a massive paper tiger. And yet this guy wants to throw out even more of like the one nationers who, let's face it, if you throw them out of your party, if you throw them out, well, your party, the Conservative Party, if you throw them out of the Conservative Party, who are they going to go vote for? They're going to go vote for the Lib Dems. So you will give the Lib Dems a massive boost in support if you do that. Let's not beat around the bush. You know, at that point, you are asking, you are doing, well, Ed Davies' work for him at that point. This guy does not understand the British public voting habits. He doesn't even understand the Conservative Party, what's happened to them, misreads the situation of what's been happening for the past couple of years because it has been the hard right in control of the Conservative Party for the past couple of years, not the One Nationers. David Cameron was really the last time they were actually properly in charge. And it is your side, the hard right policies that they've pursued that have led them to this situation. And that they're now turning around because, of course, they read from their, free market fundamentalist Bible, thinking, oh, if we do this, everything will be all hunky-dory, it will all be wonderful. But then it doesn't happen like that. It doesn't turn out that way. Because they keep on failing and failing and failing, they don't turn around, look themselves in the mirror, and go, oh, yeah, it's that policy that was a problem. Maybe we should rethink that or do something else. There's been no serious searching in the Conservative Party. And then what do? They go, oh, well, the problem must be we weren't being conservative enough. I'll go join Reform. They're more conservative. This is such a terrible reading of, like conservative, like the Conservative Party is. It's such a terrible misreading of what has happened. Awful misreading on that. Anyway, let's finish this off. So, my question now to former Conservative Party member and association chairmans like me and so many others who have defected to Reform is that if the Conservatives are so keen to unite the right, perhaps they should first get their own house in order and face up to the fact that at least half of their number would be more at home in the Liberal Democrats or even the Labour Party. So at that point, you aren't uniting the right. You are throwing out a whole swathe of voters saying, we don't want your vote. What do you think happens then to your vote share? It will collapse by doing that. Massively so. Like, I don't understand why this guy thinks that will be a good idea. Don't understand why this guy thinks this will be a good idea. But it's complete misreading of the entire situation. So until they figure out how they are going to square that circle, I think any talk of an alliance or pact with Reform is for the birds. Said, let's have a look at this and see what the comments think of this. Someone begins stating here, perhaps we should remember that the Conservative Party is not isolated and is subject now to the winds of change. Trump has only been in power for 2 months and the whole Europe, including the UK, is talking of a change in the 80-year-old policy of cutting defense spending to increase health and benefit spending. It seems possible that a lot of the, quote, liberal, politically correct woke will be now blown away in that change. I suggest that the whole country will now be moved to now have more defense spending, less benefits, especially for the working able, as well as a result of now on the liberal sides will now find themselves out of step. I don't think so, because I think what's going to happen is that there is now going to start a movement, and you can already see this happening. If we are being asked to pay more for defense, first of all, should we be cutting benefits? Absolutely not. I think that's a very bad move. What we should be asking for is those who can pay more should do so for the benefit of all of us, to pay more for defense. That is how it should be being framed. That is what I would want to see on this. The Conservative Party will not be end of days, not without a bang but a whimper, because if sorts are now also called the Liberal Democrat problem, it will be left with about 3.5 MPs whose fate now is to be mere barnacles stuck to the rusting hull of reform. Reform may get a sniff of relevance, maybe even some more seats. About the time, of course, Trump leaves office, so the transatlantic alliance may look very different, at least by then. But do conservatives really want to capitulate so easy when challenged from the right? Lib Dems 72, Reform 5. Uh, if this author is indeed right about at least, quote, at least half of the conservative opposition, any connection with reform, then surely it would be at least more realistic for him to be calling for the minority who are in favor of his party to join him in it. That does not seem to be a signal of some weakness in his case. Perhaps even recognizes that a revulsion for reform and, of course, the deep damage its adjacent parties have already now been done, and that the party itself is now likely to continue to do so to the country and to conservatism, and does not now even remotely entail any sympathy whatsoever for either of the Liberal Democrats or for the Labour Party. On the contrary, it resides now in our treasured national interests, with the very which insurgency that he now supports has betrayed. Someone else says here, well said. It implies the probable removal of about half the parliamentary party, but that's probably now the only way to restore the entirely capable of pursuing a coherent and recognizable conservative agenda in the long run. Gee, just throw out half your conservative party. Brilliant idea. Brilliant idea, right? So, and as someone else points out here, the electorate removed 2/3 of the parliamentary party last July, replacing them with just 5 now with Reform MPs. How many, of course, were replaced by Lib Dems? And it's interesting to see now, because I do think part of the reason we are seeing now on Conservative Home, people now talking about Lib Dems where they previously weren't at all, is because these Conservatives are now going out there. They're starting to canvass. What they are seeing is all of a sudden, gee, where did all these Lib Dems come from? I didn't meet this many Lib Dem supporters last time. That's what some of these people are out worrying about. This is why we go to Conservative Home, because it has those people who are the activists who do comment on here, and they are now starting to realize, oh, there's a lot of Lib Dems around here all of a sudden. Yeah. Someone else says here, the bigger issue, we have absolutely no idea what reform actually stands for economically. Is it the economically killing energy plan that you put out, with now extra billions of costs now to prevent above ground pylons, or is it the 2010s UKIP agenda of NHS privatization? Yeah, he's right on that. Absolutely right. Someone else here said here, I think this guy would be better off sorting out the row in reform between the Faragists and the Lowites. I'm not really interested in the people's opinions in opposition parties who do so now as conservatives. Why does Conhome publish these pieces from people who aren't even conservatives, abusing the Conservative Party and its members? Other parties don't do it. Reflecting currently on the recent spat between Farage and Rupert Lowe, where one of Reform's 5 MPs has now criticised Farage for control and domineering style. Just as the latest example of how difficult Farage now finds it to actually work with any kind of team. He's the classic prima donna. There is no possibility of Farage working well in any kind of partnership or coalition. Leadership was always one of those 3 outstanding issues, along with the coalition, not how to deal with, and policies. However good he's, of course, selling at reform, there is of course, the prohibition now of the electorate who would never vote for Farage and would probably like to see someone else like Lowe, for instance. Again, I don't think they would even want to see Rupert Lowe. I think even if Rupert Lowe got in, I think he would do far worse at Farage, to be honest, as being that prohibition who would just not want to see him at all. Someone else says here, yeah, there's absolutely no chance of reform con deal. Reformers absolutely do not want it. The future of the Conservative Party is now wealthy Liberal voters, not socially conservative voters. The bridges are now burnt. The Wets currently include more than 70% of Tory MPs who are now socially liberals in now wealthy, socially liberal constituencies, and who dominate most of the decision making now in the Conservative Party. Furthermore, socially conservative voters have now been utterly betrayed by the Tories and now increasingly supporting reform. Those voters are not going to vote Tory again. I would even say, why are they going to vote reform when reform put out a bit of an interesting manifesto, not just a contract with the voters? Someone else says, yeah, sometimes standing up for your principles is far more important than a quick win. Wow. Someone who actually gets it. That's perhaps, of course, even more important to the point now making that we're watching now the Trump policy at work, where quick solutions are now being seen as a winner and now being put above justice in the preference now of lasting, rational solutions. Even if this was true, that Conservatives would do better by selling out their more liberal thinking to a Trump-style reform party, it is better now to stand up for those principles. And liberal thinking isn't wokeism. Churchill was a liberal and not one who would suggest he was woke. Liberal means believing in tolerance, freedom of choice, and democratic principles. And finally, of course, being liberal-minded at Conservatives doesn't make you, of course, a Lib Dem. With regard to respecting a legitimate democratic vote to leave the EU, Lib Dems proved to be either liberal nor democratic. They did. They just, said, let's think about this again. Let's, not, throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. But there you go. Of course, that continues. So yeah, already not people very too enthused with that idea. I think the guy who wrote that was mischaracterized the entire stance of reform for that. But tell you what, if this guy ever sees it and you want to chat, please do get in contact. I would be fascinated by that, having this conversation. Yeah, because there's a guy who does not understand anything on that front whatsoever. But anyway, so as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, let me know what you think down below in the comments. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.